Thanks for joining us on This Week in Health IT Influence. Today, Nancy Ham, the CEO of WebPT, joins us for a wide-ranging conversation on physical therapy during the pandemic, leadership, diversity and inclusion, and a lot of other topics. She is a phenomenal guest, and I know you're going to enjoy the conversation. My name is Bill Russell, a former healthcare CIO for a 16-hospital system and creator of This Week in Health IT, a channel dedicated to keeping health IT staff current and engaged. Special thanks to our Influence show sponsors who are investing in our mission to develop the next generation of health IT leaders, Sirius Healthcare and Health Lyrics. If you want to be a part of our mission, you can become a show sponsor. The first step in doing that is to send an email to partner@thisweekinhealthit.com. A quick note, we launched a new podcast. It's a completely different channel. It's Today in Health IT. This is where we look at one story every weekday morning. It's about a 6 to 8 minute episode. Check it out. We're covering the JP Morgan conference right now, little snippets all week. Again, phenomenal conference. We learned a ton of stuff. That's where you want to go to get the update on what we are hearing from hospital CEOs and CFOs. You can subscribe to Today in Health IT on the website, todayinhealthit.com, or you can subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, you name it. We are out there. If you are new to this show or returning after a while, we now do 3 shows a week. Monday, we cover the news. Wednesday, we have an influence or solution showcase episode. And every Friday, we do an influence episode like this one. Be sure to check back for more great content. And now, on to today's show. All right, today we have a returning guest, Nancy Ham, the CEO of WebPT, returning to the show. Good morning, Nancy. Welcome back.
It's awesome to be back. Looking forward to another great conversation with you today.
Yeah, I had a great time talking to you the last time. You have 25 years of healthcare experience. Have you ever experienced anything like what we've experienced in 2020?
Not quite. I went through the first dot-com crash. I went through the Great Recession. But the confluence of economic issues, societal issues, technology transformation, it's been quite the year. And then, of course, it's been a very interesting year because in those prior crises, we were still working from the offices. But this time, we've all been home in our dens or basements or offices or studios since March. So yeah, it's been a little different this time around.
Yeah, this really has been 2020 has really been just interesting from so many different perspectives, which leads me to believe that we're not going to have trouble finding stuff to talk about. So, but before we get there, why don't you remind our audience of the work at WebPT and what you guys do?
Absolutely. So we're a SaaS-based technology company. We provide the electronic medical record, practice management system, and a suite of ancillary products to outpatient physical therapy. We have the honor of serving over 20,000 clinics, which is about 40% of the industry.
Wow. And you guys are PE backed?
We are. So, but maybe since I last talked to you, we became part of the Warburg Pincus family. And that's been really exciting because Warburg has a real thesis around specialty-specific EMR companies. And so they are investors in 4, including us, Modernizing Medicine, Qualifax, and Xperity. So we actually have a little club where we all get together and talk about topics and help one another out. So that's been really, really helpful during this year. I have my 3 brothers who are the CEOs of the other 3 companies, and we talk all the time about what are you doing about this? How are you responding to that? What are you doing about, Black Lives Matter? What are you doing about your sales forecast? So that's been really a special thing to have this year.
Yeah, it's nice to have those communities that you can talk to. What would you have done prior to coming together as a community like that? Would you have had those conversations with others, or who would you have leaned on in that case?
I've really made networking kind of a hallmark of my career. I enjoy people. I learn from people, and I've grown up in the industry with a cohort of people who are all now CEOs. So I just would have reached out to the people I've been working alongside and growing up with professionally for a long, long time. What made that special is their companies are almost exactly like mine.
Right.
They just serve a different vertical, like urgent care or orthopedics instead of PT.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the rehab industry a little bit, since it's the place that you serve. How has that section of the industry been impacted? And actually, let's not talk broadly. Let's talk about at different stages, like early on in the pandemic, maybe the spring, and then how has it progressed throughout 2020?
Well, it's been quite a roller coaster ride because immediately visits to outpatient physical therapy plummeted to, around 20% of pre-COVID levels. And I mean, over a 2-week period,
Wow.
just boom, patients gone. Now, PT was deemed essential, so it did stay open in all 50 states. And so the industry did a really good job of getting that message out, reassuring patients about the safety protocols that they were taking. One thing we were very proud of is people were able to use our automated patient messaging system to communicate, what was happening. We saw a tenfold increase in messages going out to patients. And so patients started coming back very steadily. And we saw, a climb really through early Thanksgiving until everyone was back in the 90% percentile of where they were pre-COVID. But now we're seeing it top back over. So last week, we're already seeing visits down 10% again. And there's a few reasons for that. Obviously, you have elderly patients who are big consumers of physical therapy, who are sheltering in place, to protect themselves from COVID. You have major disruptions to 2 feeders into physical therapy. So joint replacement surgeries, as those elective surgeries got placed on hold for a number of months, that new patient pipeline dried up and then they reopened and now they're getting crowded out again. And also athletics at all levels. When people are active and moving, which is awesome, they also get injured and need physical therapy. So the disruption of sports at every level, from kids to pros, has also had a negative impact.
Wow. Yeah. We did a show pretty early on in the surge with Hospital for Special Surgery out of New York, and they had transitioned their entire hospital from doing orthopedic surgery to being a med-surg unit, essentially for COVID patients. And so that sort of phenomenon happened clearly in New York. It was necessary and needed to happen. But when we closed down the elective surgeries, that really changed the game. So moving forward, I mean, have we started to do things differently as an industry in order to bring people back? And you gave us this quote the last time we were together, and I've actually used it and you called it the 90% challenge. And you said every year 128 million adults have a musculoskeletal condition that lasts more than 3 months that would benefit from physical therapy, but only 10% of them ever start physical therapy. So we call that the 90% challenge. 90% of the people are not getting help. That was the case prior to the pandemic. We probably have a lot of people that are not seeking help now. How are we reaching them? How are we, besides just, texting them and asking them to come in, are there other methods we're using?
Well, there has been a big change in physical therapy in that prior to COVID, there was no reimbursement in physical therapy for tele-rehab. And then all of a sudden there was, under the public health emergency, Medicare approved it, and then virtually all the private payers followed suit. So all of a sudden you could communicate like you and I are right now with patients at home. The industry did a magnificent job pivoting. Some people went from 0% to 100% tele-rehab in a matter of a couple of weeks. And I think people have been pleasantly surprised. It's not a substitute for manual therapy. Physical therapy is hands-on, but you can support patients in their journey to their best health remotely by checking in with them, observing them doing their exercises, correcting them. And so we saw a huge adoption of tele-rehab. Now, we're going to have a permanent reimbursement issue. There's only temporary reimbursement during the public health emergency, so we need it to become permanent, and then we need it to be reimbursed at a level that's closer to what an in-clinic visit is.
What's it at now?
It's about a third of an inpatient, an in-clinic visit, which is too big a gap. And so we need to work on appropriate reimbursement, but patients loved it. There have been some early studies that have come out, like from Bay State, that said patient satisfaction is very high and quality was high. I did tele-rehab during COVID, and it was fantastic. I didn't have to get in my car. I didn't have to risk walking into the hospital, which is where my PT is. And, I got well. So I hope that's going to be a permanent change, because that's a big part of how we impact that 90%. Because PT is inconvenient and expensive. You have to get in your car, drive there, be there for an hour, drive home, 2 times a week or 3 times a week. And for a lot of people, that just doesn't work. They're single parents, they're working families, they can't take the time off from work. They can't afford, all those out of pockets. So I'm really hopeful that this is a sea change, a permanent change in the future of this industry. And that's how we're going to, in 10 years, double that pitiful 10% of patients coming to physical therapy to 20% would be a great goal.
Are physical therapists, so I'm sort of curious more than anything on this, do they see COVID patients, or do they wait until they have essentially moved past the infectious part of the disease? I mean, how do the physical therapists sort of approach this?
Well, so one, they all have their PPE. They're just like any caregiver. They have to protect themselves because the patient could be asymptomatic and carrying COVID and not know it. So there's a tremendous amount of PPE and safety protocols and cleaning protocols that the industry is following. But I ideally, no, they're not treating people who are actively symptomatic. It's usually fine clinically to not have, those visits during that 10 or 14-day period. But at the other side, there's this phenomenon of long haul patients. So many people who have COVID, not so much the ones who are asymptomatic, but people who are symptomatic, and for sure people who are hospitalized, they need physical therapy afterwards to recover their strength. It's a very debilitating disease for some people. We don't understand why some people seem to sail through it and others don't. But there are now entire units at hospitals devoted to long haul COVID patients, helping them recover after they've technically, finished the course of COVID itself. And so there is going to be, regrettably, a boom of patients needing that long-term physical therapy after COVID.
So I'm going to get to technology here in a minute. My last question on this is, you sort of touched on this a little bit, but what's the lasting impact on physical therapy going to be as a result of the pandemic, do you think?
Well, one, I do think there is a new class of patients, these long haul COVID patients, that we need to understand how to outreach to them and care for them and support them over what is a many month journey back to their full health. But I think tele-rehab, it's just got to stick and get to an appropriate level of reimbursement. And it took other disciplines like primary care, quite a few years to really figure it out and get the 50 state licensing issue resolved and get the reimbursement resolved. But I think it's going to be a major impetus to make that change. And that's going to help PT reach more patients. And it's also going to help them reach more patients who are in socioeconomic classes that are challenged, because it'll be more accessible and cheaper. Which will help, reach people who don't have the same access to physical therapy as you and I might.
Yeah. So let's talk about technology. Let's start with your product. So you get into this. Obviously, you're navigating a lot of things, the health of your employees and work from home and whatnot. But were there any specific requirements that you just immediately out of the chute, they were, hey, we need these kinds of changes made to your product, to the system of record?
Well, first of all, we had to launch tele-rehab, which we did in 7
I'm sorry, 7 days you launched it?
7 days. It was quite an intense 7 days, but it's not just the ability to see the patient visually. It's now you can bill for it. What are the codes? How do you get that to flow through revenue cycle management? How do you include it in your analytics? So it wasn't just let me get a Zoom session spun up. There's a lot of other things around it. So we launched virtual visits. We also have launched touchless intake, because people don't want to touch pieces of paper, they don't want to touch clipboards or tablets, and so we had been working on it, fortunately, because we couldn't have done it in 7 days. We've been working on it for quite a while, so we launched touchless digital intake. We saw, as I said, a huge uptick in using our patient relationship management software, because there's just such an urgency to communicate with patients, communicate you're open, what your protocols are, that it's safe to come into therapy. But what's different, like wait in your car, we'll text you when it's time to come in. And we launched a lot of new technology around how do we work with our customers virtually. So normally, if we were taking live a big customer, we would be on site, and we can't do that right now. So a whole suite of innovation around our learning management system and how we train clinicians virtually, how we do a go live day virtually. That's been super interesting.
Wow. All right. So I want to jump into each of those. It's interesting. So the one that jumped out at me the most was patient relationship management. I had somebody once say to me, it was an EHR vendor, and we were sort of talking about, hey, we're thinking of going to Salesforce. They're like, why are you doing that? Your EHR does that. And I sort of looked at them like, I'm not sure you understand what relationship management are. So I'm going to put you on the spot here. Because, when we talk about CRM, customer relationship, we're talking about outreach, meeting them where they're at, multi-channel, those kind of things. What kind of things did you put in there so that your clients could interact with their patients where they live?
So first of all, it's of course integrated with the EHR. So we know everything about you.
Yep.
We know, why you came to us, what body part, is injured. We know your age, we know your gender. So we know your whole persona. So we're able to communicate with you throughout your patient journey in a personalized, clinically relevant way, which Salesforce cannot do.
Yeah.
And so let's say you threw out your back. So the first message might be, we're so sorry, first of all, that you threw out your back. We're looking forward to your first visit. Here's what to expect. Here's information about low back pain. Here's information about how your treatment's going to go. And then we're going to communicate with you all along the way, checking in with you, encouraging you, motivating you to complete your course of care. And then we're going to stay in touch. And we can do that in a really personalized way. Maybe we met you because you're a runner and you injured yourself. And so you might get drips about how, great stretches to do for running or how to train for a marathon safely. So we're able to really engage with you. We also send you on our mobile app home exercises. PT, you have to do your homework. So you have to do your home exercises between visits. So that's part of this patient automation. And then we did something really different recently. A lot of the outpatient specialties are looking forward to big cuts of reimbursement come January the 1st, 9% for Medicare for physical therapy. So we put out messaging to patients to said, would you mind letting your congressperson know that PT is important to you and you oppose the cut? We'd never tried anything like that before. And in 1 week, we helped generate over 16,000 letters to Congress.
Wow.
So it's hugely important. And Salesforce, we use Salesforce as a company, is a fine generic tool, but it is not going to do these kinds of things that are clinically specific and relevant and timely.
By the way, thanks for taking that question in that manner it was meant, which was more informative than a challenge. And I think you're right. It's Salesforce is a generic tool, and you have to teach it healthcare, whereas you have a healthcare tool, and you just have to teach it modes of communication, right? So you have to teach it the multi-channel. You have to teach it, you essentially have to say, look, we have all this information, we can build experiences around it. Whereas Salesforce, you would have to, first of all, you'd have to lift all that information and move it over to Salesforce. You'd have to make meaning of it in Salesforce. And then you would have to build all the workflows still on top of it to move forward. So it's really a completely different approach. And it's another license that you have to buy.
Yeah, and we have a similar tool for referral relationship management. Same thing. Instead of using a generic tool like Salesforce, use a tool that's built for physical therapy, because we understand what kinds of people send referrals and what information do they want back. So now we're able to say, thank you for sending us 100 referrals. This many patients started their therapy. Here's their net promoter score. Here's their outcomes. I'm doing a really good job with these patients. And so it closes the clinical loop, which I think is really important.
Yeah. So, your telehealth solution, we talked to a lot of health systems that essentially early on were sort of caught flat-footed, and they said, any way we can instantiate a video visit, that's what we're going to do. And they're going to have on this screen, they're going to have the EHR. On this screen, they're going to have the video visit. And, given where they were at and what they were trying to do, that was really acceptable. I love the fact that what you said originally is, that's the base. Instantiating the video visit is really the easy part. It's how are you going to track it? How are you going to get those codes in there and whatnot? So talk a little bit about that process. How did you think about and how did you knit together the entire experience so that the experience for the care provider as well as the patient was pretty seamless and really beyond acceptable, really desired or preferred?
Yeah, I think the key was the team that was assembled. So that from the moment we started working on it, we had people representing each of our product lines. We think about products with something we call the golden thread, which is products don't stand alone anymore. And so you can't just run off and instantiate the video visit without engaging all of the other products and understanding well, now what? You had the visit. How does the data flow? How does the patient experience flow? How do I need new messages in patient automation messaging? Because what I want to tell you pre and post a virtual visit is very different than your clinic visit. So it was really just having the right people in the room, I think, from the launch, and remembering it was going to mess up everybody's analytics, because PT, maybe more so than a lot of other parts of healthcare, is extraordinarily KPI focused. Like they all know their KPIs. And we knew it was going to completely mess up all the KPIs by introducing this new category of visits at this dramatically different reimbursement point. And so we knew, like from the moment we had their first meeting, if we didn't fix the analytics, we were getting a lot of support calls. So we had to fix it from the beginning.
Yeah, I love that concept of the golden thread. Let's talk about tech startup for a second, because you're one of the people I love to ask these questions of. So organizations were at really different stages of their journey with regard to being a tech startup. Some could have been early on, just got funded in early 2020, and others could have been pretty far along. What stage of a startup do you think was most vulnerable during the pandemic? And actually, let's start there. What stage of startup do you think was most vulnerable during the pandemic?
Well, I think anyone who's in a negative cash flow situation or in a low cash balance situation, of course, was very vulnerable. And the good news is, though, there weren't so many of those this time around. Like in the first crash or in 2008, there were lots of people who were on fumes and they went under. But the funding environment has been so robust and people have been raising more money, than they used to. So instead of raising a few million, they're going for 20. So the portfolios of venture startup companies that I'm associated with, by and large, they were all fine financially. They had to tighten their belts. They did what they did, but they weren't at risk of just running out of money. So setting that aside, I think it's people who have long enterprise sales cycles, because you just lost a year, basically. People weren't in the market to buy new technology. They, slashed their budgets for innovation. They postponed go lives. And so if you're in that sort of $1 million plus, or maybe even $500,000 plus enterprise cycle, your world just stopped. And you literally lost a year. And that's really discouraging because startups need that positive momentum. But lots of other companies flourished, Bill. On the other side, a lot of people went great gangbusters.
Yeah, and that's so let's explore that side. What startups did benefit the most? I've heard health systems talk about the silver linings. We don't want to really talk about a pandemic like, hey, this was good for this, but it did create an environment where they could thrive because they were supporting the clinicians, they were supporting contactless care, all sorts of things. So, what kind of startups benefited the most, do you think?
Well, certainly anything tele or contactless, went off the charts, as we saw. But companies who deal with mental health, stress, resiliency, just boomed, because whether people were buying it for their own employees or, buying it for their beneficiaries or their patients, that whole group did tremendously well. And I'm a little embarrassed to say that EMRs like mine did really well. Because ironically, when your patient volume drops to a historic low, if you're thinking about making any technology changes, that's actually a really good time to do it because you have the time and the space. And so we took a lot of people live this year. And I hear that from other people in other, specialty EMR verticals. So one of our themes was, well, you can't work in your business right now because you're closed or you have very low volume, but you can work on your business, and that will make you stronger and rebound faster. And that's a message that actually really resonated.
Well, so CEO of an organization, talk me through, when did it become apparent to you that, hey, this is going to be a different year? The pandemic, I mean, we were talking about the pandemic in late 2019. It felt like it became more real early on in the year. When did it become real to you? And then what steps did you have to take as a CEO early on in the process?
Well, I think it hit us all in March, right?
Yeah.
You went from planning and worrying about it to boom, it's here, and we have to do all these things right now. And that changed in about a 4-day period, honestly. I remember distinctly on Monday, I was talking to my project team about a 3 or 4 week project to get everyone home. And then on Tuesday, I told them they had to do it by Friday. So it was, I remember that week really clearly. So first of all, of course, shift everybody home. That was easy for part of your company. You're a developer, take your laptop and go. But for other parts of the company, like revenue cycle management, that was a little different. But we got everybody home. Then we had to reinvent workflows because revenue cycle management, for example, can be very paper intensive. And we said, well, but you don't get to have a printer at home because that's not HIPAA compliant and there's not a shredder in your house. So we need to be 100% paperless by Monday. So let's figure that out.
Oh, gosh.
And then we had to re-engineer the culture of the company. We had a very strong in-office culture. That's how we work. That's how we have fun. That's how we collaborate. And so moving to Zoom, we had to figure that out. But I think it's made us stronger in a lot of ways. Almost every team has a daily stand-up now, and you're all equal on Zoom. Before you might have had some people in the office, some people on the phone. Somebody might remember to turn a camera on, but now being all equal and present on Zoom has leveled the playing field. I think the communication from our teams has skyrocketed. People have learned how to have fun on Zoom. Our employee net promoter score doubled during this period, which is not something I would have anticipated. And I mean, the outpouring of communication. I think every CEO this year, however much communication they were doing it's up by 10x, and it needs to stay up by 10x. That's the new normal.
Yeah, we're seeing that. We're seeing that employee satisfaction, net promoter score, however they're measuring their employee satisfaction. We're seeing at least a 7 to 10% bump this year And you wouldn't anticipate that in this environment. And part of it's probably that communication. Part of it's obviously people have a little bit more autonomy. They can see their kids a little bit more, and those kind of things. But I think we've also, I don't know about your environment, but it's not uncommon for me to have a conversation with somebody and their kids are in the background or those kind of things. We've become more, tolerance, not even the right word. We've become more accepting of the fact that people are working in their homes. They have a family life. It's almost more real to us that these are people and they have a life. And we've become, I don't know, just more empathetic to people's situations. That's what it feels like to me at this point.
We've definitely become more human. Before this started, I knew maybe 10 employees, the names of their dogs, because we had a dog-friendly workplace. I know a lot of dogs and cats and kids and spouses now, and I think that's awesome. And the other thing that's been different, at least for us this year, in the past, I didn't communicate a lot emotionally. I didn't talk about love. I didn't talk about our family. I didn't talk about myself that much, and all that's changed. We're all now much more authentic who we are, and I'm a much more, I'll say, emotional leader. And I think that's been really important. We have some videographers who work for us, and normally they're at trade shows doing things. But since there are no trade shows to go to anymore, they've started some WebPT TV series. One is every Friday. It's Where We Work. They film somebody, at their house. They film through Zoom, but you learn all about them, which is really cool. And then they started a series called the Feel Good Files, in which employees share like the most amazing, raw, authentic emotions. And the message is, it's okay that we're not okay. Nobody's okay. Like, don't put up a fake facade. Nobody is okay this year. And I think that's been really different too. People really, senior leaders in our company being very sharing about their own struggles has been moving and powerful, I think.
Yeah, I think, when we have a healthcare podcast, I think we focus in a lot on the pandemic, but we also had an election. We had Black Lives Matter. We had just a lot of diversity, inclusion conversations and those kind of things. Talk about, if you could, talk about your journey in that area. What are you guys doing? How are you approaching it as a leader?
Well, one, I think it was a huge wake-up call for us, because I think we prided ourselves before George Floyd that we were a diverse, inclusive, welcoming company. But we realized we were not equally focused on all communities. And so we were over-invested in some and not at all invested in others. So it's been a huge effort for us. So we are committed to it as a company. I signed the CEO action pledge with PwC. We have rolled out unconscious bias training. We've rolled out workshops. We now have 9 or 10 new employee resource groups that range from people of color, but also to veterans and people of faith. So back to, everybody's in a community, and we need to embrace and celebrate all those communities. In our regular company meetings, we spotlight different holidays, like it's Native American Month, and let's have a Native American employee talk about what does that mean to them, or write about it in the digest. So we've all learned a lot more. I'll tell you the one that was the most interesting. So we put all these holidays on our corporate calendar, and along came National Left-Hander Day. And the dialogue and
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend any left-handers out there. It just struck me as I didn't know there was a day for that.
Well, I know, but the dialogue that sprung up in Slack showed it was such a path to empathy. People said, well, I always feel like I don't fit in. The world's made for righties, and I have to do a lot to adapt. And then people started thinking, wow, how much harder then for all these other kinds of people to fit into a world that's not made for them. It was the most incredible on-ramp to empathy, that one small thing.
Is that really true that the world is designed for right-handed people? Is that, I really hadn't thought about that.
Well, the world is designed for the majority. So yes.
Right. Yeah.
And, the other thing, though, that I think has been really important for healthcare is there's a direct correlation between racial inequality and health inequality. We see it in socioeconomic determinants of health. Your zip code, your genetic code are the two most powerful indicators of your risk. It's not the actual healthcare. We see COVID impacting communities of color at rates of 200%, 300% more than non-communities of color. And so there is this direct linkage between racial inequality and health inequality that I think is very important for us as a healthcare community to keep a focus on, keep talking about. This can't be a moment. This needs to be a permanent movement. And I'm seeing so much amazing work starting to happen in payers, in providers, in tech vendors, really recognizing that. And so I hope that that's a permanent change. And I'll pick on physical therapy. Not a very diverse industry. And so the support from the industry now to recruit more minority students, to help them start their practices, to engage more with patients of color, who a lot of whom are in that 90%, I think it's a really permanent positive change. And I'm pretty excited about it.
Well, it's interesting that you're fostering those conversations amongst your staff. Because there's so many questions I would imagine that people have. It's like, what can I do? It's not like people can't watch the TV and say, I see the problem, but a lot of it is translating into, okay, wow, this is a huge problem. How do I even start? How do I get engaged? How do I become a part of the solution, and what does it look like? I mean, there has to be, and that's just the tip of the iceberg for the questions I'm sure that people have.
Yeah, I was raised in big companies where you didn't talk about certain things at work, and all of a sudden these are the most important things to talk about at work. So it was new for me to, moderate a Zoom with 100 employees talking about race and talking about our company and are we doing enough and what can they do as individuals. And it's a very interesting conversation for us because so many of our employees come from internal referrals. And so I put a challenge out to all of our employees. You need to broaden your own networks. Like if you want us to be a more diverse company, you need to bring that diversity in through your own personal relationships and the referrals that you make. You can change the needle because we hire employee referrals at a much higher rate than people we interview from the outside world. So that was just one very specific thing to get them thinking about. But we also talk a lot about inclusion versus diversity. And I heard a great way to think about it recently. And I'm sorry, I don't remember who to attribute to. But diversity is you're invited to the dance. Inclusion is you're invited onto the dance floor. Equality is you got to help pick all the music. And at the end of the day, how did you feel when you went home from the dance? So one thing I do talk about with the company, diversity is actually rather easy, but inclusion is very hard because inclusion is human and personal. And every individual can make more of an effort to be more inclusive. And Zoom actually helps you do that. It's easier to get everybody on the Zoom talking and contributing equally.
All right. So closing question, what's the coolest thing you guys have done on Zoom? Although, my gosh, using your videographers to tell those stories, that's gold right there. I mean, that's, I hope every organization is doing something to that effect. Have you guys done, I've seen people talk about scavenger hunts and different things that they've done on Zoom calls. What's the most fun things that your team has done?
We did an incredible trivia contest, and the team that put it on put so much thought into the questions, the music, the backdrops. Like it was a full-on produced show, kind of like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Was really fun. Cooking class. Wow. Was really fun. All the ingredients sent out ahead of time. Everybody learns to cook the meal together, I think was a good one. Painting together. Again, you send out the supplies and you sit there and, paint and drink your wine is very fun. Today, my team's doing a virtual white elephant. So we'll see how that goes.
Virtual white elephant. So you send a gift to somebody else's house, like they can't turn it away.
No, you set up your gifts as virtual gifts. You just take the URL of what it is, and then you wrap it and put it into the game. And then, you go through the usual picking and swapping and laughing and teasing. And at the end, whichever gift you end up with gets shipped to you.
Yeah. Wow.
I'll let you know how it goes.
You have a creative lot you work with. That's a lot of fun.
Well, our marketing department, who is also not going to trade shows right now, they curated a list of more than 50 activities that you can do virtually so that each team didn't have to figure it out for themselves. So people who have event teams, that's a good thing for your event teams to be working on right now.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You know what, Nancy, I love having conversations with you. You have challenged me. You have educated me. And I enjoy our conversations. This show isn't going to air till January, so some people are going to say, "Hey, that's a little dated," and it will be just because we're having this conversation a little bit before the holidays. So I just wanted to put the timestamp on there so people they'll recognize that we're talking a little bit before the new year actually kicks in. Thanks again for your time. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
I always love it. You're so thoughtful about the questions and the topics. And I love that I never know quite where we're going to go. That keeps it fresh and fun. So have an awesome holiday, Bill.
Thank you very much. What a great discussion. If you know of someone that might benefit from our channel, please forward them a note. They can subscribe on the website, thisweekhealth.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Google, Overcast, Spotify, Stitcher, and I can go on and on. We are out there, so you can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. We want to thank our channel sponsors who are investing in our mission to develop the next generation of health IT leaders. They are VMware, Hillrom, and Starbridge Advisors. Thanks for listening. That's all for now.